Thanks. So yes, I think the kind of distinction, I suppose, in what we were trying to think about was particularly we're looking at participatory projects, collaborative design projects, but also projects that are constructed as part of that. And so really the talk is structured in two halves. Firstly, an attempt at thinking about conceptualizing the process, and secondly, an attempt to try and draw some lessons from the projects we've been involved in. We really see projects as starting with this kind of idea of a sphere of interest, or even perhaps borrowing from physics, the idea of a cloud of possibilities, where a kind of electron is described as existing within a cloud of probabilities. And so projects often start with this cloud. Sometimes it's maybe ether, a black hole, a need, or a missing thing. And really it's very uncertain, very unclearly defined. And this might be a kind of a potential, a seed, a space, or an opportunity. And the project that I talked really quickly about here just started off with this. We're going to do something in Bedminster with a whole load of community partners, and we don't really know what that will be. By the end of the project, it was presented as if it had this ordered timeline, but there were actually, of course, this was much more of a jumbled mass of chaotic and explorative and successful and unsuccessful events. So soon within this kind of initial idea of this sphere of interest or cloud of possibilities, they soon gather a kind of certain quality dependent on the network of actors, and which are both made up of both objects and people and nature and the things that act upon the project, and each of those bring a particular resource base on which the project kind of begins to coalesce. So it gathers a momentum. These kind of things come around materials, the people, the place, and elements such as chance. And so in this, the ideas really coalesced around, right, we're going to do something not just in Bedminster, but with this particular bit of land. We're interested in this little bit of land behind a closed gate just off a street called North Street in Bedminster. Those network of actors, once we start looking at that particular site, include people that we were already working with, so community group, the Bedminster Town team, local schools, local farm, local families who live nearby. So all of those people then sort of start to some extent, act upon it. And these possibilities begin to coalesce into distinct opportunities and directions. So each kind of, spiral in this Catherine wheel beginning to suggest a direction or a trajectory for the project. And I think we kind of think it's really important that these, at the early stages, remain multiple, that we're still allow lots of different directions for the project, allow it to sort of spiral off in various directions. And each of those in themselves bring along more fields of influence, additional resources that are needed, particular skills that are required. And so in the particular example, the next thing it became apparent that what we really needed to do was find out about the local families, people that walk by the site and what they feel about it. And it's really developed a kind of an idea about a real intrigue about what's happening behind this gate, and gathered some kind of momentum from, and gave us a remit really in which to further the project. So I think we had just under 100 people come past and record their dreams for what might happen on the site. So we see this as kind of beginning to establish like a Catherine wheel of multiple universes or multiple directions in which early ideas might set off and develop their own sort of project universe around it. So it's really important that at each stage of the process, the project is allowed to branch out, and each of those in a turn kind of creates its own mini universe or project within it. And each of these are almost ultimately different projects that could have been spun off in. But just in a fractal, you could almost zoom into each of these and find another of these kind of universes spiraling around within it. So early stages, I think it's really important that, projects open-ended, lots of ideas were generated for what would happen. And I should say this project started off as a student project, and then turned into a collaboration between part of the Hands-on Bristol team, another architect, and a maker. And so trying to conceptualize the process, we kind of see that there's, at this kind of stage, there's a real risk of mismatches, that there might be opposing values, and Sally will talk a little bit about the importance of kind of shared values later on, ineffective communications, missed opportunities, narrow-mindedness, certain directions which lead to red herrings, certain directions that lead to kind of further kind of investigations required, how it's going to be made, and so on. So there then became, from this kind of, I don't know, increasing focus, an idea of a shared idea of what the project might be a little bit like. And from that, actually, with this, a really worked up kind of quite sophisticated render of what the atmosphere of the project might be like. But still at this stage, really, although there had been some investigation into how it was made, actually not that much in the realities of constructing it. And so thinking about this as a project, there's a certain point where you focus in on that particular universe, the one which is, in a sense, the project itself, still beginning to, still defined by that network of actors and still defined by that particular project situation. But the understanding of it as in this way is really useful in thinking about collective work, because I think it's quite easy to think that you're all working on the same project. So you think that you're at the center of this kind of universe, but actually one of you or a group of you are working with the project thinking it's A. Another group of you are working on the project and thinking it's B. And finding that actually you're kind of slightly working on different projects, and particularly within a collective approach that I think is quite challenging, quite problematic. And really the best projects, I think, come together when we are all caught up in the same universe, when we're all at the same point of investigation. So part of this kind of challenge, I suppose, and contradiction came from thinking about it in the construction phase and really beginning to see sketches that take on a life of their own and take us on to another starting cycle, almost another kind of miniature universe. We knew that we were donated some materials and the additional influence of a fabricator, so the person who's making this thing, who's a kind of second stage designer. And so between these kind of universes, we might see that somehow sometimes there's a positive kind of wormhole connection which brings out unexpected consequences. So for example, a half-scale model of the project turned out to be really quite a beautiful child-scale bench that's now been a storytelling area which has now been donated to a local school. And I suppose another unintended consequence, this is the final opening of the project, was actually its unfinished quality, which turned out to be a much more positive thing than we imagined, because it set the stage for it to continue, for the project to be taken on by a series of people who are now taking on ownership of the project. They're called Ebenezer Angels because it's Ebenezer Gate. And so these people have now given the project its own continuing kind of sphere of investigation. So that's something about the process. And I think now over to Sally to try and identify the lessons that we've learned from this.
Thanks, Rachel. Actually, before I sort of start plunging into them, it's just thinking aloud. Basically, the lessons are, and the conversation is about how to herd kittens, because a lot of working and designing and making with a lot of people with a lot of different potential agendas, values, universes, multiverses is actually quite a sort of juggling act. Oops, sorry about that. So we've actually tried to condense it into two things, which actually are common sense: loose fit and tight program in the broadest sense. That perhaps having a tight program or a sort of tight, if you maybe call it a law of physics, if we carry on the analogy, enables us to be able to have a loose fit, and a loose fit enables us to be fluid in our in our thinking and our responses, adaptable, resourceful, and be able to take on the challenges that working with a whole load of people, a whole load of different circumstances and materials sort of throws at us, really. These sort of lessons have come from a mixture of running design and make events, but also having a bit of time nowadays to reflect on those in terms of their sort of educational value, and that in turn feeds this process. So that's where the lessons have come from. So loose fit, tight program. And at the top of that is shared values. One of the things that we've come up against again and again and again is a mismatch with the values of the people that are engaged in a team design activity together. Clear boundaries and edges, whether you break those boundaries or rules or not, just being able to establish some clear boundaries and edges forms a really helpful reference point. And again, helps people maybe with their agile thinking and for the project to be very fluid. And also for the project to have a beginning, a middle and an end, because the beginning is all about maybe the actual starting point, the need that Rachel was talking about. And that might be the end use, which is at the end, but it's important to think about it and be driven by that at the beginning. And the process being the middle, and the end being the handover, perhaps, of your design-make project or construction, but that isn't the end. It leads to a new beginning, and it leads to the construction being occupied and used. So being mindful of the beginning and the middle and the end each time is really important. So just really quickly, have we got enough time left? is to just use a couple of projects, both of which have involved students from here in different capacities. One was working at the invitation of NTNU architecture students in Trondheim in Norway, and the other one was working with the Architecture Centre and their youth programme, Shape My City, which some people might know about, but it's for 15 to 18-year-olds who are interested in entering the construction profession. We'll start off with this one. There's the beginning bit, the need. There was a timber expo happening in Trondheim, and the task was to basically showcase a timber construction, but also provide an access route from one part of a route to another part of a route. Had a very tight programme. It was mainly form-led, even though it obviously had to function. And we did actually get given materials, so we had to work with materials. And we had to work with given anchor points that had already been built on site. 2 minutes left, so I'll race through these. There's that multi-universe of possibilities beginning to emerge out of those of forms and potential processes. There's role-playing, which is another really useful tool to try and flesh out some of those potentials and possibilities, and also to establish common values and shared visions. And then suddenly the materials arrive on the scene, which are things that we didn't really know what we were going to get, and trying to figure out what to do with them. And finding out a construction principle, again, that might be tight program. That might be what you referred to as a tight program. It's a set of rules around which this can begin to develop that allows for that fluidity, as we discussed. Language is really important, different types of language for different purposes. And the final, the final stairs. And they're functioning as a exhibition and part of the expo. Asylum Seekers project was a shelter. It was for asylum seekers to keep warm, hold lessons, informal language teaching, preparing and cooking produce, sharing ideas, and basically making friendships. Ella there is one of the key workers on this project, and she's showing us where the site is. That's what we had in terms of materials. And it's interesting that the project sort of, that thing of cloud of possibilities actually started with a lad on the Shape My City programme, Hanny, who really wanted to build an earth structure, and we put one thing of cloud of possibilities with another, which was a need, and we started getting the conversation going. Taking the things that we had for free, we developed, again, maybe you could call this a type programme, which is a sort of construction principle that basically allowed us to be fluid within a certain parameters. And the other thing, we had to have a very tight programme because we had all sorts of visitors participating in bits of the construction. And in terms of, I suppose, the educational value, we set this up, and again, we needed a tight programme to do this, so that young people would learn off each other and not off somebody who was in a senior position. That was really important for this. So the highlight of the project for us was young people teaching young people from totally different walks of life as well. It's really exciting. We have Hani there, who's just about starting an architecture course. What's his name? Kareem, who's just graduating, and Brendan, a skilled carpenter who just wanted to come on board for free. And then we had Avon Wildlife Trust coming on board doing the cob work, and Joe there, who's a low impact building, really skilled building expert. And that beginning and middle and end, that was us, the team. That might have been our end. And this was the end for the crew that came along just for a day to throw mud at the walls, which they really loved. And this is the end for the, and I suppose the legacy for the allotment asylum seekers that are going to be using that space. And then maybe that starts a whole other journey for other people. That's it.